you for this community. Thank you for those who serve. Thank you for our first responders, our sheriff's department, police, fire, ambulance services, and all those that serve others. Just pray that you'll guide them, protect them as they go through their daily duties. Just give us wisdom tonight and every chance that we have to make decisions for the community. And just thank you for our nation and the liberties and the freedoms that you have given us, the many blessings that we live under. It's a privilege to live in this country, and we thank you for it. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, council, we're going to ask for, on any motions, to give a verbal aye or nay to the motions today instead of raising our hands as we've done in the past. We have everyone on council represented. Seth is on Zoom, so we're here at 7-0. Looking at the minutes for the June 8th, 2021 meeting, are there any corrections or additions? If not, I'll hear a motion to approve.
So moved.
Have a motion to approve.
Second.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved, 7-0. Okay, transfers. Arlene?
Do I need to come up there? Oh, yeah. I was gonna say that. Thought I'd get out of that. Okay, so the transfer I'm asking for this evening is the CARES Act Infectious Disease Relief Fund, and that was actually monies originally received $50,000 to set up the test site, which we did, and then $50,000 was later added to that towards the end of December for a vaccine site. So anything related to those two sites was what those monies were coming from. The first $50,000, we kind of guessed at where we needed to put the appropriated numbers or amounts, and the $50,000, it's been received. It's been here since December. We just failed to put it into a line item. So that's basically what I'm asking. We have been doing at least 2 clinics at the 4-H park since January. Those ended last week. We were no longer giving the vaccinations at the 4-H park, but we were there for 2 days a week, and the rental on that is what this mainly is going to pay for. And the test site at the Nazarene Church, we closed down last week as well. So now those numbers have been brought back here. Obviously the numbers have dwindled as far as the number of vaccinations that we've been given. Has dwindled somewhat. It seems though that the testing is picking up somewhat. In the last week, we're hearing lots of people wanting to come in and be tested. So on that same note, the Delta variant, I'm sure that you've heard a little bit about that. The Delta variant is one that is a protein from the COVID that was first identified in oh shoot, I just lost my track, in India. And so far we have no Delta in Wells County as far as we know. It has been found in District 3. So they're saying that the Delta variant is at least 65% more communicable than what the COVID-19 and the other B1s have been found here. So we are not out of the woods yet with COVID information. The variant, the Delta variant, has been identified in all 50 states at this point. So with that being said, we were running clinics from 2 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 as far as the test site, 9 to 6 for the vaccination sites, and some of us in the health department incurred several overtime hours as well as vacation time that we were unable to take just because of the demands of what was happening with COVID. So I'm asking your consideration. It's not a part of this transfer, but I am asking your consideration to pay those hours out for the couple of people in the department who have had overtime hours and again vaccination that they were not able to use during that time. So.
And those would come from the CARES Act.
those will all come from this. Yes, we do have monies left over. This grant was actually to go until June 30th. And we did close down the test sites because it just wasn't feasible for us to continue to pay the rent amounts that was out there, plus being away from the office because nothing here went away. So with the numbers dwindling, I mean, we went from 430 to around 430 a day. Tomorrow we have like 30 scheduled, so there's quite a difference there, and we can handle that here. With school picking up, we'll have school shots too, so we're hoping
What's the age group that you go down to, the
12 and
eligible
above
for
now can
shots?
receive, 12 and above, and we have all 3 vaccines, so. And the kids are now picking it up, and I think with school starting, we'll see the kids getting more vaccinated now before school.
Does the person getting the vaccine, do they choose which vaccine
They can, as
want?
long as they've not started. If they've
Okay.
started with the Moderna or the Pfizer, they
Right.
have to continue with that. The Moderna is 28 days later, the Pfizer is 21 days later. The Johnson is one and done, so, but everybody has their preference. So it's been kind of interesting to watch that whole thing, so.
Do we need separate motions for, okay, so let's, I'll first hear a motion for the transfer that's in front of you.
I make a motion for the transfer, in the
Yeah.
health department for the CARES.
Okay, we have a motion,
I'll second.
we have a second. Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Okay, second would be a motion to pay for the overtime hours that.
And vacation.
And vacation.
And vacation that were incurred, and those monies would be coming out of CARES Act funds. So they would not be coming out of general. So I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion from Todd?
Second.
Second from Chuck.
And
All
then
in-
the commissioners will then have to pass an ordinance to amend the handbook.
Yes, yes.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have additionals. Hillary, would you like to come forward, please? Tell us about your additional.
Well, I have a big additional. I'm asking for another $20,000 for autopsies. Last year I requested $30,000 for this year's budget. Unfortunately, the Decembers of the previous year will fall into, like 2020's of December fall into 2021's budget just because of how they're billed out. I had 5 autopsies that were completed in December of 2020. And so far this year, the death rate has been up. I have right now 42 deaths. Last year I had a total of 47. 16 of those 42 have had to be autopsied. 5 were natural, 8 were unfortunately overdoses, 2 suicide, and 1 accident. I don't know what the rest of the year is going to bring, but if it brings what we've already had this year, I'm going to need that amount of money. I did get for toxicology this year, the state is paying for like your comprehensive panel. So like your basic drugs that you would either be prescribed over the counter or your basic illegal street drugs would be covered. However, I've ran into a couple of issues where I've had some huffing issues, and that huffing panel is not covered, and that is unfortunately $500. Then again, to add on like electrolyte panel or a blood sugar panel, or sometimes we get into situations where, you know, the decedent may not have blood, urine, or eye fluid, and we'll have to use an organ to get those toxicology results, and that increases that rate. I think I do have a couple of thousand left in toxicology, which will give me a little bit of a cushion, but each individual autopsy without toxicology in that is $1,200. So, you know, the 16 I've already had this year, I mean, that's we're looking at right around $20,000 plus the 5 from last year. It's pretty much wiped out my $30,000 budget.
So these latter things you were discussing, that's part of the contractual services?
The contractual services, that's separate. That's for, so I have a chief deputy who gets paid by monthly regardless. So him and I try to take the majority of the calls, but I do have 3 other backups. Those are out of the contractual services. I try to take as many calls as I possibly can, but you know, I work 24-hour shifts every 4 days, so that wipes me out completely. And then my chief deputy works 12-hour shifts at Bluffton Regional. So some of these deaths, 2 and 3 have occurred in one day, and I have, you know, one of my other 3 deputies on, and I'm paying them $75 per call.
Oh.
That's kind of wiped out my $1,500 that I had in there too. It's just, my budget's so hard to predict, and this year has just been unfortunately one of the worst years since I've been in office that I've had budget-wise.
Also, did any of these fall under any of the COVID situations? Or okay.
No, I've actually only had 1 COVID death.
Okay.
And then as far as like COVID testing went, if I needed somebody to be swabbed through the state, that was free testing that was provided to the coroners. So
I'm
that
just
was,
curious.
yeah, no, that was separate. This is just unfortunate events that have happened so far. And I'm hoping that I can return most of that money at the end of the year that it's not used, but at the rate that we're going right now, it potentially could be used.
Any more questions for
I have one off topic, if she doesn't mind. Are you having any difficulty transporting deceased?
Transporting? No. Both funeral homes that I have here in town they're pretty good. You know, we do run into situations sometimes where they are in the middle of the service, and sometimes that will delay things a little bit. But in general, I think that I generally try to call, and I've got my deputies trained to pretty much call as soon as you are dispatched out there. And working part-time with the EMS in town, I've talked to them too. If you're comfortable talking to the families, ask them which funeral home that they may want, because the sooner I can give the funeral home a heads up to do transport, the quicker, you know, the response is, especially for the family. There's nothing worse than standing there waiting in an awkward moment to wait for the funeral home to get there. So.
Thank you.
Had you heard otherwise, Chuck?
She answered the question.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to appropriate these monies to the coroner.
Motion to approve.
A motion
Second.
from Chuck, second from Vicky. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have a silent aye from Seth. I read his lips though. Opposed? Okay, we have passed. And also we, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hillary.
We have Kada.
Can we combine our report? Is
Sure.
it the same, do you want it now, or?
Come on up.
It's basically the same thing, so it goes hand in hand. Did you all get a copy of the spreadsheet?
Yes. I
With the
think, I don't know, are they
additional?
on this sheet? Yeah.
If not, I have extras.
Yeah,
I have one.
Okay. This is color coded, and this actually might help you go through everything a little bit easier. I'm Molly Hogue, the CADA Vice President, and with me I have Adam Carroll. He's our chair this year, and CADA's funds come from court fees related to drugs and alcohol and offenses. And the state does require that we spend a quarter of our funds, or 25%, in each of the 3 categories. If you look at the spreadsheet, the categories are kind of in sections. The top one is other administration. We do not have to spend the 25% in there, but we cannot exceed 25% in the other administrative categories. But in education prevention, which is the green section, treatment intervention with blue, and judicial is orange, we do need to spend at least a minimum of 25% of our fees. If we don't, we have to submit reasons for why we might ask for a change. Some years we've had where we didn't have enough requests in each of those categories. And so this year, at the top, you can see the total fees collected in 2020 was $20,544.07. With those fees, we have a grant proposal process where agencies and organizations can submit grants to us and request helping fight drugs and alcohol through those three categories: education, treatment, and judicial. And so this spreadsheet shows on the far left who has applied for those particular grants this year. The center title project kind of gives you an idea of what that project is about. And then the far right in one column from the right is how much they requested. And then the far right column is how much we are recommending as a committee after reviewing their proposals, how much we would propose to give them. And you can see that the total amount requested was almost $25,000, so that exceeded what we have to give out, about $5,000. So we did have to do some cutting. Everyone this year did qualify for the most part completely. If they didn't, there were a few that we had to cut like certain little sections out. So like one thing of the grant didn't meet the qualifications, so they didn't get the funding for that piece of the grant. In like treatment intervention section, we just did a 5% cut across the board because they all met the requirements completely, and so that was just a cut across the top. The education prevention, the drug tests for the schools were based on the percentage of tests that they give out, so that division or formula was based on that percentage of tests. And in judicial, most of them qualified. There was one that just had some items that didn't qualify, so we took that out and then took a, based on what we had left, a division of that. If you have any questions, I'd welcome them, comments. The additional is to put our money into those categories, and then we will submit claims after that for these to be paid out.
So the total additional is what are we asking?
It's the full $20,544.07.
Okay. All right, that's broken down then on ours. Any other questions, Molly?
Pretty standard from what we do
Yep.
every year. I mean,
Yep. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we accept the additional appropriations for the drug-free community.
We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have an aye from Seth. Opposed? Okay, you all set?
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Sheriff Holliday.
Evening.
Good evening.
As of when I left the office today, we had 69 total inmates in jail, 24 are pretrial superior, 15 pretrial circuit, 14 F6, and 10 DOC. Not sure if I brought up last time, we are still dealing with DOC. They no longer are picking up at our facilities, so we're kind of at their mercy to get DOC. If you start seeing DOC numbers being a little bit higher, we are delivering, and we also are at their mercy of how many they tell us they'll take. So even though I have a certain amount ready, they may call and say they'll take 3 or 5. So we're working with them as they're catching up through their backlog. Obviously, I'm not the only county in the state that has prisoners that need to go to DOC, so they're trying to get to all of us through that. I also gave you the monthly report for June. Obviously, things are up. This is our busy time. Summer tends to spring forward a lot of activity. So as you can see, numbers are up, and obviously comparing them to last year with COVID being into full effect, it's kind of hard to have a comparison in that retrospect, but I know that we have definitely been busy as far as calls generated and those type of things. I mean, we're almost up 200 calls from this time last year for the month of June. Also gave you the monthly report of generated income for June as well. I don't see anything out of the ordinary. This will be the last month that we see funding for gun permits, as I explained I think the last time before I came to you. Those are now free, so we will not see any more funding this year for that.
Is that being replaced from the state from what you normally would have gotten?
The generated income?
Correct.
No, not at all. It's free. And we still have to do them, so so that's services that we have to just, supply. There's no generated income for that now.
Nothing really has changed on your end
Nope,
administratively other than
correct.
you're not collecting any money for it.
Yep, exactly. So, other than that, just kind of give you guys a heads up. I know we've been talking for a long time as far as the jail renovations and things that are COVID related. I know things are lightening up, it seems, or appears to be in the community and the things that we do on a daily basis this year, and that has been nice, but it's still out there, as Marlene said. We still operate under COVID protocols at the jail to keep everybody safe, to keep COVID out of our jail. I actually have an employee out this week with COVID, so it's still here. She's not here to verify the numbers, but the last I heard that 98% of the cases are coming from people that are not vaccinated. So, and we got 60% at least of our community that's not vaccinated. So, so we're still operating that way. I know everybody wants to kind of be free of all this, but my job at the jail obviously is to try and keep the inmates safe and the employees safe and all those other things. So we do. I don't see that ending anytime soon. So it is something that we deal with on a daily basis, day in and day out. We do get obviously sick employees. We are down about 3 jailers right now, so our employees are pitching in, and it's obviously vacation time. Everybody wants to take vacation this time of year, so when it comes to budget time, we're always talking about how overtime isn't just always used for, it's used for a variety of things between training and coverage and all those fun things. So I'm sure we'll be talking about that again come budget time, so, and how that all plays out. Other than that, I don't have anything else, so keep moving here so you guys can keep going.
Quick question, I know
Yep.
I've asked you a million times, and it's still, the DOC payments, that's an annual payment now, right?
Only for the F6.
Just for us, okay.
Yep, if you see that we have generated income every month,
Yeah, and
that
that's
is,
because
that
we
is
were-
for, yeah, so F6s, which we house in our jail facility, that's that one lump sum payment that we get.
Just for F6?
Just for F6.
Okay, okay.
All the other DOC level
Is-
1 through 5s.
Is it per diem?
Yep, as soon as they get sentenced in court, they become a DOC inmate, and then we can start billing from that date forward, no matter if they sit in our jail for two weeks. I mean, the only positive, which we don't get paid that much per day, the only positive of them still being in our facilities is that they're now DOC classified, and we can bill for that.
Where are we again on the daily per diem? Is it did
They
they ever raise that? They were talking.
They did only to $2.50 a day.
Okay, never got to 50 then?
It was $30 for over
Yeah.
30 years, and I think it's $32.50.
So it never got, they was pushing
They
for
did.
50, right? Wasn't that
Yeah, they
shared
talked about
report position?
increasing it every year a little bit to try and get it up, but they've only done it once at this point, so,
That's fine, just curious.
yep.
Okay, thanks, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Sarah, I think you're up. Here to give a update on the library. What's going on?
Yes. So I'm not sure exactly what all you guys want to know. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I did look up some stats just to kind of give you an idea. I looked back at 2019 as well, because obviously 2020 stats looks like we're doing amazing compared to 2020 stats. But so we increased patron count just from May this year to June this year by 6,000 people. in the span of a month of 6,000 more people coming in. We've had a lot of people come in for summer reading, and they're just like, this is the first time we've been back since COVID. This is the first time we've been back since construction. So we're hoping that the library use will just continue to kind of grow as things, I don't know, people somewhat normalize, I guess, the new normal that everyone's talking about. Even with the slight decrease of people coming in the door, we are seeing like reference interactions, so all of the informational questions, and that doesn't include like where's the bathroom or where, when does this program start. We don't count those. We had 1,831 last June, and then of 2020 went just over 2,000, and then 2021 this June we had just over 2,500. So even though we aren't quite at the numbers that we had pre-COVID, we still have people asking more questions and needing more information than what we had before. Teen interactions, so those reference interactions for teen, we had 298 in May and 776 this past June. So we have a lot more teens coming in with summer, and which is a good thing. So study room use, we're now seeing anywhere from 20 to 70 more uses per month, depending on the month. And that's compared to 2019's numbers, not 2020. The crazy thing, our ebooks and e-audio material has increased by anywhere from 100 to 500 more circs with each item, 100 to 500 ebooks, 100 to 500 e-audio per month. So more people are checking out digital than they were before. But we did help 960 people with free tax services this year. We were the only place that offered free tax service with AARP in the county. And then Adams, I think, public library, they were the closest within the area. We had people trying to come down from Fort Wayne. Allen County didn't offer it. We even had a few people try to come up from Indy. My sister or my brother said that you guys offer free tax service. We'll drive 2 hours, which is like, we're full.
Who actually does that for you?
We worked with AARP. So they come in and we offer the space, but we also schedule for them. So, because they're all volunteer based. And at first they were trying to do it all. So we had to schedule 2 interactions. So the people were supposed to come, drop off everything, leave, and then come back within a week. And their taxes were supposed to be done. And the volunteers were like, we're going to revolt unless you allow us to do this in person with plexiglass or whatever, masks, plexiglass, because they're like, we have too many questions. Like, they don't fill out everything. And so we went down to just 1 interaction, which helped us do more appointments. So we were hoping we were going to reach that 1,000 mark, but we got to 960. Adams filled up, and so then they started sending people our way. I think Huntington, I don't think Huntington did it this year, just like Allen County. So,
is that something you do every year?
We do every year, though usually, like, we have it Mondays, and then Council on Aging has Wednesdays. And then the Council on Aging just chose not to do it this year, I think because of COVID concerns. And AARP was like, if your building's okay with us being there, we'll work around whatever, COVID concerns you have, because we just want to provide the service. And we were like, yeah, we'll do what we can. And we have the space with the meeting rooms to kind of space people out. So they don't have quite as much space at Council on Aging. So, but let's see. Curbside, we decided to keep curbside. A lot of people are still using it. We have around 20 to 40 a month that are curbside. We had around 200 during the height of COVID. But a lot of times it's even just moms, when my kid fell asleep, can I just pick my holds up? Can you come bring them to my car? Or elderly who are like, can you just bring them out to my car? So we're probably going to keep curbside. We just do it with our front desk staff, and their holds have to be available. We don't go and find it for them when they call in. They have to have already had the hold put on. It's available. You pull up, we bring it out to you. People seem to really, really appreciate that. So we are probably going to keep that. And ASEAN just had their restroom remodeled. They didn't have their restroom updated when they redid the building, and we were able to do that with dividends from money we have invested in the foundation. So we're excited about that. And as of this point, every roof on our Bluffton building now has a warranty except for the newest section. So that's our next thing to consider. So, but any questions?
So your newest section doesn't have, that doesn't
Well,
make sense to me.
The newest, so every phase had a different roof installed, but the latest section, that would have been the 2007 edition, so the tallest section is the newest.
And it didn't get a new roof on it during the renovation, is that what you're saying?
No, we didn't,
Okay.
we,
So all the other pieces of.
all the
have
other people
warranties
have
too?
been, yes,
Okay.
and they weren't new, they were, they kind of resealed them, and that company provides warranties, where before, none of the roof had a warranty. So if there was a problem, we had to pay it out. But now they come, there's a problem, they come within a day, they fix it, we move on. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Any more questions for Sarah? Appreciate the updates.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Talk about the jail and highway garages. And Oscar, can you come forward, please?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll thank ahead of time the commissioners. A couple of commissioners are here tonight, and Roy being here to help with any questions that might come forth.
Thank you, Council President, Council members. For the record, Oscar Gutierrez, Boundary Consulting. The document you have in front of you is a report that we compiled. When I first came last month, this was originally part of what we had in mind to do a report for this body to help them make a determination. Our original proposal was just to do this work. As stated last month, we were not going to charge anything for this report. We were simply going to make it part of a potential bond issuance. What we do as a business is, when communities are not as far along as you are, we try to have a contingency in case we do, we start doing a bunch of work and then it may be 2-3 years out, which is not the case. You guys have a project in place. I understand that there have been some concerns regarding the contract, and I understand that the executive body would be potentially who will be signing my contract, and this is all being done in good faith, and the information hopefully will be useful to not only this body but the commissioners to work side by side. I'm not going to go into I'm not going to read you the report, so I will try to highlight what is important and hopefully frame the conversation to ask some questions and trying to get somewhere in regard to the financing of these two projects. So as this report was put together with two potential projects in mind, one being the jail renovation project, which is currently estimated to be $7.7 million. I believe the commissioner signed that contract this morning and is scheduled to move forward. The other project is the highway garage, which includes a salt barn and some additional infrastructure improvements. That project we are using a plug number of $14 million. That's an absolute maximum amount. We are not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that is a budget number. We are not suggesting that is the maximum that a garage would cost. Simply, we were using it as a parameter to demonstrate what that potential impact would be. So I just wanted to start by talking about the two numbers that we're utilizing. When our approach was to divide both projects for the sake of an analysis, as the jail project qualifies for a couple of additional sources of revenue. Primarily speaking, the American Recovery Plan Act and increasing local jail income taxes, which are both potential sources of revenue. But before I wanted to start talking about property taxes, I wanted you all to be aware of what it would mean to potentially have a tax increase to your community. You're looking at potentially a $22 million project, or close to that, if you reach both maximum parameters, and there has to be a source of repayment. It either has to be income taxes, it has to be property taxes, or there has to be some sort of existing revenue that would have to pay that back. So unfortunately, the burden is on this body to determine what the revenue will be to meet those obligations. So one of the highlights that I want to bring up is on the third page of this report, which is your property tax history. The county has seen a steady increase in property tax values. When I talk about the assessed valuation, that is the combined tax value of all taxable properties, farmland, commercial, individual properties. And outside of 2019, where there was a slight decrease, I didn't do much research on why that would have happened. This body might actually know what happened in 2019 to make the values go down. My best guess is there were likely appeals happening. That was around the time that a lot of communities were seeing the big box appeals, and that was not uncommon around that year for a lot of communities to see a decline from all of the appeals that were brought forward. But outside of that outlier, over the last couple of years, you guys have seen slight increases. Why that is important is that we are basing our numbers on 2021 assessed valuation. If the county was to continue to grow, let's say at 3% or at 3.27% or at 5%, that growth, as the assessed value goes up, the property taxes that you impose for any of these projects would also go down. So when I'm saying that potentially something is 3 cents, if these, if you wanted me to run a calculation where I'm doing scenarios and you're telling me, hey, we would like to see what the county growing at 3% or 5% would do to the impact over the next few years, we can absolutely do that, but I would need some guidance on what this body feels comfortable would be a realistic number to run those numbers. What the other highlight of that page is that the property taxes for Wells County, when benchmarked around, if you draw a circle around Wells County and you look at all of your immediate neighbors, you'll notice that the next lowest is at 43 cents and the highest being 94 cents. So the property taxes that the county as a body is imposing on your taxpayers is significantly lower than your neighbors. And that's something to be proud of, and I understand why this body has such hesitation around increasing taxes, because you've done a pretty amazing job at keeping it almost at, it's almost half of the next closest. So if you were to do a project for the jail, and this initial analysis is speaking specifically to the jail, and you were to do all $7.7 million plus financing costs on the property taxes, that would equate to roughly 3 cents. It's 2.9 cents, but I rounded it up to 3 cents because that's what it is ultimately. So you're looking at a potential 3 cent increase if you were to decide to do everything on the property taxes. Now, because the project, and I didn't, because I didn't put anything on this document regarding control projects or referendum numbers, because those are technically legal opinions, but I can talk about it conceptually, but not to be taken as advice. The control project number for this county would be $5.57 million, $5.575 million. And if you go above that project threshold, which at 7.7 you technically are, you would be subject to petition remonstrance. What that means is that you're subject to the lesser of two numbers. That would be 500 property owners objecting to the project. So 500 property owners would have to say, we do not want this, to potentially object to it. Or you could have 5% of all registered voters object to it. So it'd be the lesser of the two that could potentially object to the project. One of the things that we didn't, before I get on to the American Rescue Plan Act, is that amount, if you were to use the entirety of the amount towards the project, it's still subject to legal opinion, so you would have to have bond counsel give an opinion on this. But if you were to lower that amount below the 7.7, you would technically be issuing a general obligation bond under the constitutional debt limit, under subject and under control project thresholds, if it was deemed that it was a gift towards the project, and again, subject to legal opinion, you would be able to issue that bond without having to be subject to that remonstrance period. Now, there's a chart there as well that, not to get too into it, but that just shows what a 1 cent does to a property. And I use housing because housing is a little bit different than other parcels such as farmland. Farmland doesn't have the same deductions that a home, so even if a home is valued at $150,000, you still get to take advantage of some deductions. So the reason why these amounts look lower as the net is because they are eligible for deductions prior to being impacted by the tax rate. If you were to look at a farmland, you would just do 1 cent for that parcel. So let's take, for example, a farmland that's worth $120,000. They would ultimately be paying roughly $10 a month additionally for 1 cent, because it's 1 cent for every $100
Per year.
per year.
Yeah.
And then you
said
do,
month.
and then you divide. No, I divided it by
Sure,
by
okay.
12. Yeah.
Sure.
That's why I use that 120,000 to do easy math. So you can use the green highlights there to ultimately play with what 3 cents would look like, what 4 cents, 5 cents, and that's just you just have to multiply times the number of cents that you are potentially looking at. In regard to the American Rescue Act plan, or the American Rescue Plan Act, you potentially have $2.7 million eligible to be used towards the project. Even if you don't use any of the funding towards that project, the funds could still be used to cash flow the project. You now have a project that needs to start immediately because the constructor can't delay any longer the bids that are out there to be honored. And as everybody's aware here, costs keep continuing to go up. I can't even, when I hear $14 million for the garage, it may be possible because everything's so high right now. So I honestly, that's not my business and I don't pretend to know, but I do know that costs are going up, and because that has to take place now, you have that $2.7 million that you could technically start using it to cash flow. What would have to happen, and again, this is another legal position that will have to be taken, and I understand that Barnes and Thornburg was engaged to do the garage, but you will also need bond counsel to be engaged to do the jail if treated separately. They could bring before both bodies a reimbursement resolution. What that would mean is that you could go back 60 days and forward 3 years to reimburse yourselves for any funds that you use that are within your control. And that would include the ARP money. So you could technically use the 2.7 and before closing decide, you know what, we will just reimburse ourselves for that. Again, that would be, if you do reimburse yourself for that money, and then you could potentially be subject to that remonstrance period. So there's some legal triggers that we'll have to work through, and again, I would feel more comfortable if there was legal counsel engaged to give better recommendations on those funds. But I guess what I'm saying about ARP money is that you should technically feel comfortable spending that money towards the jail, because you can technically reimburse yourselves and change your mind at any point, assuming you feel comfortable with the remonstrance period and not using it. The last piece that I wanted to bring attention to was your income taxes. The county is able to raise up to 1.5% of your taxes to go towards correctional facilities, jail facilities, community corrections, any of those types of projects. However, this is not a recommendation but a highlight, that your income taxes, while you guys have an incredibly low property tax rate, your income tax rate is a little bit higher than your neighboring communities. Again, I'm only using your neighboring communities because that's who your constituents are probably gonna hear from. So while enacting a jail tax, income tax is still on the table. One of the things that we would propose, that we would work with your bond counsel to do is, as the bonds are issued, we can put on the preliminary official statement a disclosure that the county would still like to explore other revenues in the future. Meaning that when you start paying back the funds and you have to make the annual payments, you could reduce that amount by potentially going and instituting an income tax. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt, but
Yes,
is
sir.
the income tax analysis in this? I didn't see it.
Yes, sir, where it says Wells County jail tax, that is assumed, that's an income tax. So that would be page,
Yeah, roughly what page was that?
4.
Just the next page, like 4 or 5.
4.
let me count them here, so I didn't have a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, it would be 5.
Thank you.
So that just, what that shows you is the breakdown of your current income taxes, what you are ultimately using your funding for. So the 2.1% that you guys have is roughly equivalent to the total $4.9 million, 4.981548 exactly. So that's how much you guys are collecting on income taxes, which is 2.1% of individuals' income. Now, you wouldn't have, in order to make the full payment of the bonds, you wouldn't have to raise it the full 1.5%. Technically, it would be realistic and to do about a quarter of 1% to alleviate that. That would bring you from 2.1% to 2.35% to be able to cover that, or any variation thereof. So you could do potentially even 1/8%, or whatever you may decide to subsidize and balance the funding. Again, ideally, in order for the bond strength, you still would want to do it with a property tax guarantee. That's what investors are gonna look at, that's what's gonna make them feel comfortable. But ultimately can decide to, at any point, by disclosing that you could potentially enact this, keep the door open to using this in the future. And any questions before?
Do many communities use both?
Most communities only use the income
Either
tax.
one or
Actually,
the other.
the jail tax is
Just
the
curious.
most common source of revenue to pay for jail facilities. And also, the projects are usually a lot larger than the 7.7 you're looking at. I know Boone County's looking at $40 million project. Knox County, I'm working on that project, and that's potentially $23 million. So it varies. So you could technically enact it. I don't know the legal definition about whether, if you would impose a low percent now, if you could then increase it to the full. That I couldn't answer that. That's a legal question, and I wouldn't be able to answer that.
Well, one other quick question, unless I missed it here real quick, are we, on what we're talking, a payment of roughly $500,000 annually, right?
Yes, sir.
I keep seeing the $499.
Yes, sir.
coming.
Yeah,
Is this a 30, I mean, is any term, any length of time we're talking here at this point?
20 years. 20
Oh, okay,
years.
that's-
Yeah, so it's a
Did
20
I
year.
miss it back in there? I might have-
Yeah,
okay.
it.
That's
well,
fine, I just was
There'll be a
curious
full
where-
schedule along, if you know, where.
That's fine.
They'll say the tax rate impact page further on, it has the full
Okay.
schedule of.
I'm just trying to
both
catch up
projects.
to where that $499 keeps playing. I just wanna
Yeah,
see.
so that is ultimately what we would anticipate. And as for the $7.7 million towards the project, plus our estimated financing cost, and we put our assumptions on there for, these are based on other deals that we've seen, bond council being roughly $40,000, local council being 15,000, and I'm sure Roy can tell me that's high, that's low. These were just estimated numbers, so it could go slightly up or down, but the cost of issuance is not really going to move. The 7.7 being the big number, so it will be somewhere around that $500,000 mark, slightly less, slightly higher, but that's a good estimate. It could also go down with, depending on the interest rate, which we are being conservative and rating it at an A, which we would work with the county to institute some policies to make the credit go a little bit higher than that. That's just assuming that you guys don't take any action on any of the fiscal policies that a fiscal body would typically have to have a higher rating. There's a small calculation there to show your constitutional debt limit, which is technically $11,221,000. This project would be underneath that, but still subject to petitioner remonstrance because it is above the 5,575. One of our initial recommendations for this project was to separate it. Ideally, this body will still have to determine whether or not to use the 2.7 in its entirety towards the project. How it affects it is if you use the full 2.7, you're not subject to petitioner remonstrance. Again, that's subject to legal review. And you could issue the bonds a lot quicker for the jail. There are some efficiencies to doing one bond, and there are some inefficiencies. For example, you would still probably have to do 2 series because of this. If you combine both projects into one, now you're going over the $16 million threshold, and that triggers referendum. So there's nothing that I would ever recommend that says that you should go to referendum. That's, I don't think anybody really wants that. But you could still technically do one bond with 2 series and have a lot of efficiencies with the cost of the attorneys. And because we're doing the same document twice, we would only bill once, as opposed to the 2 different types of documents, which is a lease and a general obligation bond, where we would have to do 2 separate completely processes and have to bill twice. So but those numbers are minuscule in comparison to the overall project, and that's why we still feel that separating the projects may be the most advantageous thing for the jail. You also have since received a breakdown of the cash flow for the project, and Amores was here, and I believe they provided that to the council this morning, or to the commissioners this morning. And between now and December, the total amount that would be spent towards the jail project is $2.1 million, which can easily be cash flowed with the ARP money. If it was to go beyond that, I understand that the county is still looking at selling the farmland, which could potentially be up to $2 million. Again, these are just numbers that we've heard. And that could also be used to cash flow the jail even longer if you wanted to combine them and lower the cost of the issuance. Yes, sir.
Good question. Todd raised a good point in terms of the term. If they were 2 separate bonds, they could be 2 separate terms, correct?
Correct.
And what's the maximum term allowed by state statute?
20 years, because they'll be both paid back by property taxes.
Okay.
Unless you were to do the jail income tax, then that would be the length
Right.
of the. If you did a pure local income tax and not specific to the jail tax, then you could go 25.
But we could go 15. is
You
what
could
I'm
go
saying,
15.
Or 18.
Correct.
I mean, in traditional business sense, you would depreciate new construction a lot further out than you would a remodel or repairs and maintenance, and one might think of the 2 bonds in the same way. You would take new construction out 20 years potentially, but if there was some way to finance the jail shorter.
You could do that.
Yeah.
And that would be any scenarios that you would like me to show. I can show you what that looks like. I will say that if you lower the term, you're going to increase the payment,
No, I
which also
understand.
would potentially impact the tax rate. So we can demonstrate any scenario that you would like us to do. The reason we did it at 20, which is the maximum time, was to lower the payment amount to be able to minimize the tax impact to the taxpayer.
But in the long term, it costs you more in interest.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think that's correct, but my recommendation would be we'd go the longest that we can, simply because these are long-term assets, and you'd want to, or they're going to be used more than 20 years. They're going to be used well over that. And I don't think you should burden younger taxpayers with a higher taxing amount when you have people that that could be spread over a long period of time. I don't know if I said that correct, but that makes sense.
One thing that we could recommend is when these are what is called callable, when you can refinance them. So unlike a traditional bank term loan, think about it in that term, so these are set for a period of time and are able to be refinanced, typically 10 years, but we could work with the underwriter ahead of time and say we want to market these to be refinanced at 7 years. So that way you have 7 years to look at where your property tax rates are at that point. You can see how much your assessed valuation has increased over the next 7 years, and then at that point you could technically reset the term to be lower in the future, but it would not be until that call date that we would be able to do that.
Would we be under risk of interest rates being higher or not?
I wish I
it's
had
like
an
an
answer.
adjustable. Yeah, you're there. Yeah.
I'd be in a private island if I could answer that question. I don't know.
But that risk would be there.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know whether it would be higher or lower.
You know, 6 years ago, I kept hearing historical low, and I've been hearing that every year. So
I understand.
It just at some point, things have to go back up, but it's definitely not the 80s, 12% interest. Yes, sir.
I think some of Scott's thought, though, is that we don't want to be put into a spot in 10, 15 years where we're talking about a 100-bed expansion and we still have 5 or 10 years left on a remodel.
Yeah, and
Sorry, Roy.
That's when you roll it over. Right? I mean, if you bonds and you're continuing on,
Yeah, you
keep a bond open
could.
and you can continue to, at the rate,
that's right. So
in time.
So Commissioner Wood brought up a good point. You can technically issue bonds towards the same project. Right now, what you are telling the taxpayers and the bondholders is that it's the reasonable assumption that this is all that you need. That this is that it's not a larger project, and that is an honest thing. Where you start to get into dicey territory is if you really knew you needed a 200-bed jail today and plan to do it next year, and you were just trying to split up the project cost to avoid thresholds. That would be where that comes into play. But Commissioner Wood was correct. You can issue new bonds at that point, and you could technically issue income tax. You could then at that point set the 1.5%, like other communities have done, to build new jails, which is typically the traditional way that fiscal bodies go about financing the larger jail projects.
Well, and that wouldn't put any undue stress, because we're already continuing on, correct?
Correct.
I think an observation of what Scott was saying in terms of useful life or how a business would amortize it. I think of the Amoresco plan, this is replacing original jail equipment. So it's replacing stuff that's been 35 years. So I don't know that a 20-year is necessarily that out of line. The other question I guess I had for Oscar is the jail tax. The statute says you can go not longer than 22 years.
Correct.
And that's an income tax, so I'm assuming that's not subject to the property tax cap.
No.
And not subject to petition and remonstrance.
No, the remonstrance periods, that is for the control
The
project.
cost of the project, right?
So that is still subject to the control project, it's not subject to the property tax.
Oh, it doesn't have to do with how you're paying it, just whether it's
just the
project.
total of the project.
Now, so to your point, the 22 years would be how that could be repaid, but it could be amortized over 25 if you use your overall income taxes. So the question was, how long can they be amortized for? And I try to answer that local income taxes can technically be amortized legally 25 years, although the jail tax would be 22. And in the last 3 years, they could, be some.
If I'm reading a report right, though, the 499,000 or whatever the amortization, am I correct that you say the jail tax could produce the revenue to service that debt?
Yes, sir. At roughly a quarter of one, less than a quarter of 1%.
And that's the whole amount, not any reduced amount by ARP.
Correct. Yes, sir. And so that's a great conversation for this time to have, which is if you were to enact, and what I can't answer is if you set the income taxes at, let's, I'm just rounding up to that quarter of 1%. If you have the ability, to your point, Counselor, that in 10 years, you need another 200 beds, do you still have the ability to then go to the max, which would be that 1.5%? And that is a legal question that I don't have the qualifications to answer. But yes, a quarter of 1% is not a, for a $100,000 earning individual, you're looking at $25 a year as an increase. So it's not nothing, but it is also, it's just who is paying for it and how are they paying for it, and it really, I can't recommend you which way to go because you know your constituents, and I'm trying to give you as many options as possible to slice and dice it the best way that you think, because you could do all three of them and just do a little bit of all of them, right? You can do a little bit of ARP, you could do a little bit, just raise it like 1/10 of 1%, and then do the rest property taxes, and then maybe use some of the farm funds to pay it down over the next few years. I mean, the options are limitless on how you want to slice it, and I just need guidance on where your thoughts are so that we can show you how that looks.
Well, can we have a brief conversation on if we were to raise property tax? I don't see anything in here. What effect would it have on farm ground?
Yeah, so farmland would be a 1-to-1. So farms are, not all farms are the same. So if you are in a developed area and you have all utilities, the value is going to be higher than if you're in the middle of nowhere and you're just typical farmland. So the best way I can answer your question is that it's a 1-to-1. So if the value of the farmland is, in the sample I used earlier was 120,000, for every penny it would be 1 cent to every $100 of value. So when you're looking at this potentially at 3 cents, you'd be looking at 3 cents for every $100 of that value of that specific land. So it is difficult to benchmark farm because the pricing is so varies just from farm to farm, what they're farming, the type of soil they have, the proximity to, so it is not, so the values are going to be vastly different, but the reason why I showed home values is because of the deductions, so they're not 1-to-1, and the calculation is a little different.
Is there another lever on the homes, as far as homestead deductions, that could be used to, let's say you reduced, to equalize some of the farm versus housing? You see what I'm saying? Is that a lever that can be used?
I don't think so, Counselor. I can look more into it, but once the tax rate is set, the assessor will end up putting that on the properties per the amount. So I don't know how there could be relief. At least I haven't seen it, but that's something I can research.
Do you know?
We have a 0.3 credit in our lit that goes back to property tax relief. So if we take like 0.1 away from that, which still leaves us 0.2 in property tax relief, that generates like $781,000 annually for the corrections.
One thing that you could consider doing, and that's an analysis that we can do, so if you are getting local income tax property relief and it's being used towards correctional facilities, you could, however much you increase the 1.5%, only 20% of that could be used towards operations. So one of the things that the sheriff will have to work that, we can work with the sheriff to determine is anything that you take away from that $700,000 to enact a jail tax, that 20% has to be enough to mitigate any impact of any revenue loss towards the operations. Does that make sense? If you, okay, let me slow down. If you were to enact a local income tax for the jail, only 20% of that can go back towards operations, paying staff, paying for anything that is considered operations in nature. The other 80% has to be used towards the actual facility. So the 7.7, when we're talking about that 0.25%, you will want to take into consideration any loss from that 0.3 and make it up by also increasing the jail income tax to be sufficient to ensure that the sheriff doesn't see a loss in operational revenue that is going into his budget, or identify a different source of revenue to ensure that doesn't happen. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
I don't see how that relates to your question.
No,
You're talking about general, yeah.
Because I think you're talking about if you reduce the income tax to issue the jail tax, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if that is, so what I heard you say is that's roughly 700 or something.
700, mm-hmm.
Is going towards operations of the jail currently.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not.
No, we're talking
No.
we're talking about
You talk
credit
about-
relief.
Right,
Okay.
right,
Homestead credit.
right.
You're-
Okay, I thought that you were saying that was being
We're
used.
we're not
No.
talking about jail tax at all here.
Okay,
Yeah,
and then
the way
I
understand
misunderstood your question. So let me try to re-understand it. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying that from the relief amount.
The relief amount to the,
Was being
to
used.
To into the,
homeowners.
no.
Okay, that's what I thought.
If
you
we
said.
put it into the corrections pot,
Oh,
We
I
would
see
be,
what
we
you're
Instead
would
saying.
be
of
gaining
release.
that much.
yes.
Well, this is
So you want to
totally
reallocate it?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
You could
Yes.
use, I thought you said it was currently going to
No.
that. And I said, well, if you're gonna lose that, we need to figure out. a
No,
way to do
no,
it.
no,
No,
no.
no, no.
No,
I
we have that
misunderstood.
available to us.
Yes.
Then yes.
So
then
that,
you-
yeah, that's the
then-
lever I was referring to.
Okay, then absolutely, if you have $800,000 available and the liabilities $500,000, that, you have no impact. Assuming that is not being used for something else.
No.
I, not knowing enough, it's something we can look at, but it seems like a reasonable assumption.
You're just taking part of the homestead credit.
Yes.
Yeah, those credits.
Reducing some homestead credits
Yes.
to help pay for
1/3
this
of the
whole
project,
thing.
Which some of the taxpayers have not been paying on, they would start paying for that, it'd be more upfront to them.
I mean, that sounds like a reasonable
It's a-
way to do this.
Easily would
And you would
cover
only
this
have to
issue.
do it, you could technically use that for both projects if you had the $700,000, because the overall amount, assuming it's all paid for without bringing it down from ARP money or the farmland, the total amount for both projects. I just pulled it out. It's 1.3, 1.3-ish million dollars, so you could reduce that significantly by using the entirety of it to bring both of them down. Now, I'd have to make sure that it's eligible to be used, again, legal opinion, but it's completely reasonable to assume that.
You're not talking about the entirety, you just mentioned
Just
taking
0.1.
0.1 away that,
No, that's a total county amount, our portion of it is, am I correct, is.
That would all go in.
That would be our portion
Mhm.
of it, okay. Because other distributions go to other,
Not with that one.
oh, no, oh, okay.
I mean, that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that, right here. Any additional questions about the jail before moving on? There is a timeline that was provided preliminary by Ice Miller. I contacted him as the name was brought to my attention at the last meeting. Again, I understand Barnes and Thornburg was officially engaged for the garage. I have no issue working with either or. I'm simply making the statement that there may be efficiencies with the same law firm working both deals if you're thinking about combining both projects. If you are going to separate them, then you could technically use two attorneys because they'll both bill you separately anyway. There might be some savings for them showing up at the meeting if it was the same firm, but just want to say that the reason why ICE-Miller provided this is based on the guidance I was given, but it could be any law firm. For the jail piece, for the garage, will have to be Barnes and Thornburg, and again, that is a decision that will be made by the county commissioners.
Yeah, let me just ask, Commissioners, we have not retained Ice Miller, have we? For either of the projects?
I'm waiting for this meeting to.
So but we have retained Barnes and Thornburg for the highway project?
Yeah, it was for the highway project.
Okay.
Because based on what information I had gathered earlier on, like we moving forward here as far as, we knew this project probably would come faster than the highway and to get it moving, and that's why to go, you know, Ice Miller had looked at that, talked with them a little bit in the past. I think it's imperative, I mean, as we, just to kind of stop before we get to the highway, to enter into the fact that with our Amoresco project and agreement, we need to have your blessing on the ability to get it moving. And I don't know if this would be the time to go ahead and approve of some funding. I think you had that in front of you. What did you say, 2 million to get through the end of the year?
Yeah, so it's
in theory
roughly 2.1 to get you through December. Again, this is simply a suggestion, recommendation, which is you have 2.7 in sitting in an account. Even if you don't decide to use them at closing and reimburse yourself, so you could cash flow the funds through this, to the, you know, until the project is closed, and how soon it closes will be determined by two things. One, if you combine both the projects, and two, if it's subject to the remonstrance period. If you decide to use the 2.7, it will be a quick process because it's just a general obligation bond. We could get it done in 60 days, no problem. So the cash flow will be short and sweet, but it will also filter the project. So you won't get it back. If you want to get it back, then we'll have to be subject to the remonstrance period, and
that's treating as one project that we're talking about right now.
Well,
at this point with the jail, at this point.
the jail, I mean, I'm talking about it separate. The threshold
Doing
would
each one
be
separate,
between
yeah.
the five. It's more project amount.
Okay.
If you don't use the ARP money funds, then it just takes a little bit longer because you have to have the waiting period for either property owners or registered voters to oppose it. So that's the part of the length of time. The timeline that was tentatively here to kind of demonstrate the time it would take to do this is taking into consideration a remonstrance period. So to Commissioner Woodward's point is, what would be useful is your permission to use the 2.7 to at least cash flow it now, understanding that could potentially pay yourselves back if you choose to, or you could choose to use it towards the project, and that determination will have to be made. But because the contract was enacted and the project should get going, there has to be a source of repayment. If it's not that source, then it would have to be something that's recommended by the auditor.
I'm assuming you guys understand that there's a price hold.
Exactly.
August
Yes.
1st.
Exactly.
August 1st?
Fourth.
4th?
Yeah, so that's
Time is of the essence.
Yeah, my recommendation would be that we do use the ARP funds for cash flowing to keep the jail project going on the timeline that keeps that price hold active, and that there are no increases with that. Now, that's probably gonna need a motion to do it that way, but that doesn't pin us down to tonight deciding whether we're gonna have another income tax or we're gonna do other relief, or take it from homestead exemptions, but at least we can keep the jail project moving forward. And we'll have the ability to cash flow that, at least probably towards the end of the year.
That's exactly what I was gonna talk about, and I think, I don't know at that point if we need to pass a resolution within the next 60 days
Yeah.
that would allow that.
So that will have to come from legal counsel, and it's ultimately stating that you guys authorize yourselves to pay yourselves back any funds, whether it be ARP money or any other funds that you use towards the project at closing from bond proceeds. So you will have, I would say, 3 weeks before closing, I will have to know with good certainty the amount, so that the underwriter can go and give
Which amount are you referring to?
the amount that you will, that the project will be. So if you use the ARP funds and bring it down to $5 million, I need at least
okay, I
3
see.
weeks prior to closing the bonds for you to make.
Yeah, we're not making a decision because we're using those to cash flow. We're not making the decision that we're gonna use those
Correct.
fully for that project
So
necessarily
you
at this
have
point.
time to decide. and
We have, that gives us
consider
time to
any
decide,
prices.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't tie you down to using them.
We use partial or all or none.
Correct.
And that covers you that way.
Yeah.
And then also, like on the sale of bonds, that goes through the commissioners, is that correct?
That's correct. The appropriation of the hearing will be held here. The appropriation hearing will be held at the fiscal body, but the approval will be done at the
Right,
commissioner
okay,
body. So
right.
if there's a,
Right.
So I have a question, I just wanna make sure we don't earmark ARP and then change it, and we have ramifications because we don't have legal counsel giving us
that's correct.
the correct answer.
So that is,
My only question.
so,
I mean,
so there
I'm
need.
sure we got the 2 or 2.7 or whatever in an account someplace, but
I don't know, that- we're not earmarking it.
Do we have it all?
Yeah,
It's just cash flow, but if
Yeah.
it is earmarked and how it's used, well, there'll have to be an opinion.
At
of-
that point, correct?
And-
That's not right.
They were pretty specific in terms of the State Board of Accounts, what line number. And my understanding, the feds are gonna audit you they're gonna wanna see that account. And if you're gonna have checks going out and then coming back, I'd like legal counsel signing off saying you were okay in doing that.
Right, because if we don't spend it right, we have to pay it back.
And I would agree with that. And I believe, unless it does have an opinion from, or at least from legal counsel, of the eligibility to use.
And we can look into that for you. I mean, we'll take care of that.
I'm not saying you can't do it,
Oh,
I'm
no,
just
I
saying,
know.
I'm not telling you. You
Oh. When I say counsel, I mean Ron counsel.
Yeah.
have to sign off. So, yeah, ideally, when we get to this, usually to this point, there's usually, I have a counter legal party that says yes or no to the things I'm suggesting, so I just.
okay.
So I think you've said it from the point of, to move the project forward, like to your point, Chuck, keep it moving. You know where your funding, the funding's there to get it started.
Correct.
And no matter how you come about where you're gonna go with it, I think at that point, that's why, to Chuck's point, to keep it moving every year point, you would need a vote on it for Amoresco so they can go ahead and send out the letters of intent. That sound correct?
Right, once we receive the commissioner's signs, the notice to proceed, then we can send out the letter of intent to our subcontractors that they can then lock in with their supply chain and make sure that we're locked into that pricing that they're holding right now with their suppliers.
The immediate amount is 10% per the schedule that was provided this morning, so even if you don't feel comfortable using the ARP money, as long as there is a general fund line item that you feel comfortable using, it's just really authorizing the process to begin, to Councilor Kane's point, that timing is of the essence, and that's why I recommended separating the two, to at least begin the process for the jail, because there still hasn't been a constructive or even a delivery mechanism determined for the garage, so that's going to take
Some time.
You also have how much in the 301 fund?
2 million right now, but the third's supposed to be on its way.
And what fund is that?
That is the State Road 301
Road 301
relinquishment fund.
I know the state told us we could do whatever we
still gotta
wanted
fix
to
that
with that.
So that's not
The fact
specific
that
to
we
any
would-
project?
Well, we have it tied to the tracks project.
Yes.
Okay.
He's got some ideas in terms of local match.
But
Okay.
that could be paid back. That could
Well,
be paid
So
back.
you're gonna repay yourself back. It's really
Yeah.
what you feel comfortable with. I think my recommendation is pick a source and
So we do have some options of sources to keep the jail project moving forward as you guys.
We also did have a real estate person who told us, don't sell the farm, just borrow against it. So we've got maybe a $2 million farm as collateral
You gotta
for
fix it.
short-term financing.
And our 10% mobilization, if this is signed yet this month, it would probably be September by the time you would
Send
receive
it.
that first.
Right, right. Okay, so we have some avenues to move forward.
and it sounds like you have a potential way to not really impact the increase, at least potentially, which is all pretty great news. Again, if you could bring down the cost to 5.5, under the 5575, then you wouldn't be subject to that 500 signatures, but usually a jail project, I'm yet to see a remonstrance for anything possible.
Sure.
Probably unlikely. Any questions before moving on to the garage?
Let's move on.
Really, before you start the garage, did we ever find out they were supposed to kind of tell us, you know, not the 14 million, they were gonna tell us here very near future? I thought for this council meeting, we would know about what they're thinking with the garage, the total amount. Have they ever?
Yield to the president on that
So
one.
that's what
About
Nate
Did-
mentioned in our
Could-
last meeting.
yeah, I thought he said he was gonna have.
We had a conversation, I assumed your council president, we gave that information to you, we had a meeting last Thursday, and gave that information to Seth, Steve, and Vicky. So I just assumed Steve passed it out after the meeting, so.
No,
Well, no, I did not.
I guess I was.
That is still a fluid number. That's the issue. And that's where our
14
QAW,
million is the.
we did not get a firm number from our QAW.
And that is typical, so not to stand up for architects, as architects, they will not give you a number. You still have to determine, or the commissioners will have to determine a delivery mechanism, which would be, you know, build, operate, transfer, or CMC, CMA, so there's multiple ways for the constructor to deliver the product, and I believe design build has been brought up, or at least was brought up at the last meeting. So that will still require some bidding to do, then constructors will come forward, provide some bids, and then they'll still have to go out and bid it to the subcontractors to get you a good number. So when I said that the process would be still pretty far along, that's what I was referring to, because
So what we did from that meeting, and the reason you see a 14 million number is there were some numbers thrown out that were a lot higher than what we've seen in the last year. And so we put that as, and Oscar mentioned in his opening comments, these are not numbers that are our targets. These are an absolute lid. These are not to be bid up to. We haven't even gone through the bid process to find out what a good number will be. But we can't go in and say it's gonna be 7 million and then it comes in at 10 and then we're stuck. We can't do it that way.
Yeah, I can understand that, but my guys were looking at 3 times what we originally were looking at. I mean, sounds like somebody's getting ready to, you know. I'm an appraiser, you know, and I look at stuff like that and I go, you gotta be kidding me, you know. Where is this coming from? You know, I don't know. That's-
so the max number, again, it was just a plug number for a purpose. I don't know that. I think my hesitation for combining the two bonds was part of your problem that you're having with this. When you say a number, that becomes a number, so when both bodies do the RFP process for design and build, you should have a focus on making the constructors work to delivering something of value, so that way there's competition to bring that number down. As this projects move forward, one of the things, again, bond counsel will have to do to keep the process moving forward is they'll bring forward a resolution to the commissioners on a maximum amount. So that maximum amount isn't the amount that the bonds will be, it's just, it cannot go above that amount. You can go down as far down as you want to go, but you cannot go above that amount. So that's ultimately, for an analysis, was the ceiling that we were setting without having to start the process over again. To give plenty of room in.
Going back to what Oscar said, I'm going to speak a little bit, Steve, if you don't want me to say anything, but the project is very similar to Miami County, slightly smaller, and project blueprint, just the layout, because we had our QAWs, we gave them a $40,000 number, saying bring us a plan. They're not there yet, according to Nate. So Nate is going to get us something that we can take to contractors and bid out. So I think build, operate, transfer is not on the table. I think that's a fair assumption, maybe not. But we need to have something to present to somebody to give us actual numbers. There's some numbers that are extremely high. Some things that they were designed as a pole barn with concrete floor we really don't need, with electricity, some things like that. I think the project could be done quite significantly lower, but we don't know until we get the entire plan back to us, and Nate is working currently with our QAW.
Right, we just don't want to hamstring ourselves at this point in time to have to do this twice by putting a number in that any of us could pick a number that obviously we all want it to be lower, a lot lower than that, and hopefully it will be a lot lower. But if we pick that number out and then it comes in $1 million higher, then we're going to be back to square one and have to go through everything again, and rather not have to do this twice.
Traditionally, though, is that not RQAW's job to come back at us with
some sort of budget
Yes.
idea?
Well, they've given us some numbers, but they're just afraid with the market, the wood and the steel prices going crazy. Again, they're in the business in Miami County to do the entire project, to build, operate, and everything together. And we kind of have a different view, like we would like local contractors to be involved, have the opportunity, come in with their number. And maybe they see, tweak the building by a couple feet that, steel comes in a certain dimension or whatever to make it more efficient.
Do they have a floor plan that they're thinking about or using?
Miami County,
No, or QAW for ours.
for ours, it was originally started after Miami County, but we tweaked it.
Sized it to our needs.
Yes, exactly. If it's okay, would you have a problem if I email that site plan with?
No, not at all.
Okay, you guys will have it tonight.
I don't mean to be the
Commissioner.
guy that always jumps in the room, but before we go any further, can I go ahead and get a vote for moving it forward so we can get started? Since you guys have all read through signing this. Hey, I don't get to do this very often.
So we've already given, what vote are you looking for, Kevin?
Just-
Because we've already given our,
Yeah,
we've
you
already
guys
given our
already got-
okays.
No, I know you're okay, it's just so somebody votes on it, so somebody can sign the contract, because you guys have to sign it, and we have to sign it. That's all.
What's the motion that we need to make?
Make a motion.
Well,
We don't sign it.
Let me back up.
I think you both signed.
A vote of solidarity. We know you.
We've already done that.
Okay, I'm good with that.
This is to do with the 2.7, right?
Well, that's
Yeah.
just to get the project moving in the, up to the
That
10%.
we're committing to 2.7.
So we can get the
I mean,
notice to
are we
proceed.
needing a motion to use the 2.7? Is
That's
that,
what-
we don't want to do it that way, because that hams,
No, not that. Just,
Authorizing the
yeah, allowing.
payments of,
authorizing the payments of
Yeah.
to
the,
Amoresco.
You will financially back the start of the project.
The notice to proceed means that the body has financial ways to be able to pay for that project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we want to understand, that you have a way to pay for it. And what we provided today in a schedule of values was up through December.
Sure.
Right, giving you time
Yeah.
to get this other stuff worked out.
And your numbers are based on this being done by August 5,
August 4th.
Yeah.
August 4th was
So
what.
we've got a timeline on the prices that are in that
the commitment
contract.
part.
right,
So we know you agree on it.
Yeah.
That's-
yeah.
Yeah, because last time I think you guys said pending financial.
Yeah.
So I think there's been enough discussion to entertain a motion to proceed with the jail project renovations. And we still are working on a methodology to make that happen, but we can still proceed with the project.
Yes.
So I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Guys lost that.
He
Yeah.
lost internet connection. It wasn't me.
You zoomed out time limit, huh?
It wasn't me.
We have a motion on the floor. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Scott. Any further discussion? If not, sign your approval by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have a 6-0 vote. We lost Seth, so
Thank you very much.
We'll move forward.
can move forward on the highway. Or, I'm sorry, the jail project.
Jail. Make sure we're jail.
Yes.
Sorry.
I got that. Scott's eyes got big.
All right, moving on to more discussion on the highway. Oscar.
So the highway is a lot more limited than the jail project. That's why they were separated, because the jail project, you had some options. You had potential income tax that you could enact, and you had the ARP money that you could have used. You have a lot more limits to the garage, where you really have to either come up with an existing revenue like the one you identified, or property taxes, or lowering the liability by selling assets, which is potentially the farm. We had run the numbers at $12 million, based on the rough conversations with some of the comments that were made last meeting as the high number. So when the $14 million number was communicated, I just made some changes to this report to keep the $12 million analysis and just say that this body has the ability to use the $2 million from the farm to lower that amount. I think everybody has made their point that 14 million is the absolute max and you would like it to be less. So the analysis before you is really for $12 million and then an additional 2 if it goes beyond that to be coming off the sale of the farm. I'm not going to repeat a whole lot of what I stated earlier, but to bring the conversation back to a percent value of a tax increase, we talked about a 3 cent increase for the jail. For this project, for the potential $14 million project, sized at $12 million, so this analysis is for $12 million finance as a bond. For the $12 million, you're looking at a 5 cent property tax increase on the taxpayers. So the same conversation we had earlier of taking the chart, multiplying it times 5, farmland, you take the value, 5 cents of every $100, and that is the same calculation for this. And then I combined, obviously, both projects. If you were to do the max amount, the $12 million of the garage, and then also doing the 7.7 and paying for everything out of property taxes, you'd be looking at a 7.9 or a 0.79 cents, 8 cents tax increase, and that would bring you up to roughly 32 cents, which is still would still be the lowest county tax rate in the surrounding area. So you would be at 32 cents, and then Whitley would be at 43. So you'd still be roughly 9 cents lower than they are, approximately.
And that's the next lowest.
Correct. I mean, 11 cents.
Some are considerably higher than that, over twice as high even after that
Correct.
potential increase.
So even if you put everything on the property taxes,
That's perfect.
That's it, yeah, correct.
You're still not, how do I say this? You're still doing better than your neighbors. Not saying that that's the benchmark, but just to give you a benchmark of what other people are doing.
1/3 of Blackford County. 1/3.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's impact. I mean, to your point on farmland. I mean, that's the farm. Just being across that border, it matters. Now, this is only for the property taxes that this body imposes on taxpayers. It doesn't say any, it would be a completely different analysis when you start stacking the schools, depending on the municipality, depending on the townships. So there are multiple taxing bodies. When you stack them all together, that is an analysis that I can show you if you would like to see that. But when comparing yourselves to other councils, this is the metric that you would be looking at.
And one other thing that we did last year, started that CUME capital. Commissioners started.
Just this year.
CUME Capital Fund, which is being funded.
Not funded yet, but they created
The
it.
CUME Cap Fund?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would, so that could potentially be used towards debt service. It would take coordination, and that could lower the impact. I'm assuming, what was do you know what it was set at?
The first year, the max is .0167, and then the second year it can go up to .0333.
And is that not free from the cap?
It is, yes.
Again, this is to you can, the same way, pick existing revenues to offset that amount. Another thing that, an idea that was brought forward, brief conversation I had with the council president, is you could also, if you were to potentially sell the farmland, you could take the initial part of it to offset some of the costs year in and year out to lower the impact, and come up with a strategy where we take into consideration the values going up year in, year out, so we can figure out what the 2022 assessed valuation is looking like, and then seeing what that trend is looking, and because that's going to lower that 5 cents and potentially even out, let's say, at 5 years, that you could take the farm money to offset it over the first few years to have a minimal to no impact on the taxpayer. So that is a strategy that we can also look at scenarios. I just, again, wanted you guys to take all this information, talk amongst yourselves, subject to public, open door laws, but give me some guidance on.
So essentially using the proceeds from the farm to make payments for the next several years so that they're,
to lower.
essentially that's an option.
To lower the amount.
Yeah.
Again, combinations can happen, or it can be some of that. We can piecemeal it any way possible, but what I would ask this body is that you still issue it as a property tax bond, even if that is not the intent to use as the primary source, because that is your strongest credit. So if you look at the page that looks at county obligations, that has the 20 years. It has, everything that we benchmarked was only in 2021 numbers, so we did not take into consideration future increases, which we can do. You know, we can just modify the sheet. And then we can lower the amounts based on different project costs that will give us a different tax increase. So we can play with this in any way, shape, or form that I just, again, need some guidance just to start the conversation and potentially move the projects forward without delay and then allowing the proper time to make a hard decision.
So you've given us enough information to talk amongst ourselves at this point on the highway, and that decision doesn't have to be made today, correct?
No, one of the things that I would ask the commissioners is, it would be helpful to me once they make a determination on who will be bond counsel on the jail, so that I can start working with legal counsel to start bringing forward, to the bodies the resolutions that need to take place to get the process going. And again, Ice Miller put together the timeline for what a lease revenue bond over the control project threshold would be. So the timeline won't change. The law is the law, so it would just be a different law firm conducting the work. But this is still a good benchmark on how long it will take, because the biggest differentiator between the jail and the garage is that the garage will be over your legal constitutional debt limit, so it has to be structured as a lease, which doesn't fall under that legal requirement. So it's just a way around the limit. All communities do it, so it's not like you're doing anything that every other community doesn't do. And you all have my contact information. I'm happy to get on the phone one-on-one with any of you and go down any rabbit hole that you would like to. And please utilize me as a resource. Anything for the commissioners? Do you have any additional questions for me at this time? Hopefully this is helpful to you. Per our agreement, this is not going to be billed to you in any way, shape, or form. Our goal is that if we, are doing the bond work, that's how we will be compensated. It's just a preliminary way to get you guys started.
Okay, I think we're all set. Thanks, Oscar. Okay, moving on to miscellaneous business. One thing we have is a compliance form, CF1 form for Heartland RAMC. And what do we need to do there?
I have a question, Lisa.
Yes.
Again, we talked about or passed this, what? I'm trying to remember where it was.
Early last year.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We never have done a CF1 yet form, right?
Correct.
It was
This is
just
the first
that
one.
we were gonna approve the abatement process
Right,
form.
right. So this is their first year of a 10-year abatement.
Yeah, is it, and I'm curious, of the 10 million there, or wait.
The assessed value that they're claiming for Wells County is
Because they're doing it in
473,000.
Huntington, Wabash, and
Yes.
here, and I didn't know if that was the total of all the
Yes.
counties or just our portion.
Our portion is the 473,544, and they have some sort of a formula that they used.
Okay, so that's how they came up with that.
Yes.
Okay, I just was curious.
Okay, give us 1 second. We're on another subject and we'll come right back.
So, we just need to approve their CF1.
Even though they haven't done anything in Wells County yet, to my
I
knowledge,
think
right?
they have.
Well, they put
Oh, have
They
they?
started in
infrastructure in.
Markle.
Oh, they have started?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know they were that far along, okay.
Yeah.
They're at my house.
Oh, they, okay.
Yeah, they come down our road and everything. Yeah.
Gotcha,
Fiber
okay.
run up.
So you did the on-site inspection then, Scott?
You're our guy.
You did the on-site inspection then as far as their
So we're,
compliance?
what are you?
Like we did with Haven?
Oh, yeah, you
To
can
approve.
count on me.
Yes, a motion to approve Heartland's CF1 compliance.
Okay, so we're looking
So
for a motion
Citizens
to
has
approve
done
the
a whole
Heartland's
bunch on that.
CF1 form,
Yeah,
their
they put
compliance
in all
form.
new fiber. We're even working on Saturdays and Sundays.
CF1.
CF1, that's CF1.
They're not getting that.
Okay.
I think we've lost the crowd.
They've been doing it on their own.
All right, council, can I have your attention? I need a motion for the compliance form for the CF1 for the RMC Heartland.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Jim. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, 6-0.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Oscar, come on back up.
In regard to my engagement letter, it was reviewed by legal counsel, and it has 2 signature blocks, one for this body and one for the commissioners, to formally bring me on as your municipal advisor. And thank you. Technically, it could be just a function of the commissioners, and gratefully they're allowing me to work with both of you. So if I could have a motion to potentially formally engage me, it would be appreciated by me.
All right, I'll ask for that motion to formally engage Oscar.
For both projects, for one?
That will be determined by you still. So if the way that it's written is, if both projects combine to one financing, I will only bill once, even if it's 2 different series, because it's the same document. If they have to be 2 different financings, then one will be a general obligation bond, which is a different document than a lease revenue bond. So we will do that separately. You may be asking, what are you going to do for that money? We will prepare the bond document, specifically the Appendix A. You guys haven't issued any debt in quite some time, so we will be starting from scratch. So the Appendix A is all of your information that is important to bondholders, top 10 taxpayers. So I'll be bothering you a lot to get a lot of data, compile it in the way that it's supposed to be done. I'll be coordinating with Standard & Poor's or Moody's. My recommendation would be Standard & Poor's. They do more county work in Indiana to get a credit rating. That would be putting together the entire presentation to get your credit to go up. And then working with the underwriters. The underwriters are the people that will actually sell the bonds on your behalf. We've made the recommendation for that group to be Baird. That will also be a determination made by the commissioners to engage with them. But we will work with them as they will sell it to the investors, but we will be I work for you, they work for the investors, and then we ultimately keep the interest rates flat. Think of, in bank loans, you usually typically hear LIBOR plus, and that is one metric. What bonds use is called MMD, and there's a rate that comes up every day, it gets updated. Our best guess is under today's rates, not knowing what it will be 2 months from now, you'll be well under 2% for these bonds, and our job is to keep them there. Otherwise, not that underwriters don't have your best interest at heart, but we have a legal and moral fiduciary responsibility to this body. So it is really putting together the documents, working with underwriters, and then structuring the plan for bond counsel to execute the action plan. So that's sort of what we do for the funding. We'll charge one fee if we combine them, and we'll have to charge 2 if you do them separately. But there are a lot of efficiencies too, even if you separate them, to start the meetings at the same time, because then you get the attorneys here at the same time, you get the advertising done, the public hearings. Even if you separate the bonds and one closes sooner than the other, there's a lot of efficiencies to running the approval simultaneously. But hopefully that kind of answers what my role will be in this, and it's, if they're separate, there'll be a $30,000 and $35,000 fee that I will be getting paid from the closing of the bonds. If there's only one, there will only be one $35,000 fee.
I have 2 quick questions. Blake, did you have a chance to review this agreement just quickly that he's proposing, Oscar? And given the opportunity, you would possibly support it?
I would.
Roy, have you gone through it?
Several versions. In fact,
It was
I
rewritten.
I redid the signature page to show it being signed by the commissioners as well as council.
Okay. I would make the motion that we approve and sign that document.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Scott. I have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I have a second from Chuck. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, we have 6-0 motion.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Well, let's see, we've got the contract. Steve does.
I got it. Okay.
Additional pages if you wanna,
Insert.
I think I emailed you all.
Yeah, we've seen
copies
some
of the
stuff
agreement.
that we were.
Okay.
And I don't know that you've got copies of the signature page, so if you take one, then you should have a complete copy of what.
Okay.
Is that to be inserted into this?
There's a signature page on this. Not sure what exactly he handed out. Maybe one for every council member.
That's what I,
Maybe, I don't know. I haven't seen what he's talking about. Okay, is there any other miscellaneous business from council? It's come up this evening. Any business from the audience would you like to bring up?
Again, on behalf of the county commissioners, thank you, council members, for your support, and we're glad to support you with bonding, and move the project forward.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, for that comment. Hearing no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Motion. Being adjourned. Thank you.